program might contain strong language. If you think you may be offended, switch off now.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Inside Mojo podcast, where each week we highlight a key moment in WatchMojo's 20-year history on YouTube. I'm your host, Rob. With me, as always, is our CEO and co-founder, Ashkan Karbasfrooshan. And today we're talking about one of the highest highs and lowest lows of WatchMojo. Isn't that right?
They go together. It's a pair. It's a tandem.
Let's talk about the journey to 1 million subs.
The long, arduous journey. Yeah, I mean, it took us, 6-7 years? So, I think during the 2010s, it was like the period of like super serve your audience, go really niche or niche. But when YouTube started, I mean, it was a bit of a free-for-all. And, as we've discussed, while there was obviously first like pirated content, then a lot of the vloggers, we, were admittedly in the first few years just treating YouTube like just another platform. It was like we were producing videos on, like I said, automotive tips, fashion, beauty, travel, entertainment, different formats, biographies, profiles, Q&As, and top 10s. And admittedly, like, what does that mean, to a user? If you're a user and you choose to vote with subscription, you didn't really know what you were going to get. And I think today, subscribers, good morning, Tyler. Today, by the way, we're going very early today. Thank you for your flexibility, guys, because I was in New York yesterday for a board meeting, and I'm going down south, taking the gals on their spring break vacation. So I was like, we have to do this, obviously. Yeah. We can't, it's the whole point is frequency.
Not skipping a week. We must be diligent.
We must be diligent. I mean, if you guys go on vacation, we don't have to do it, but I'm here for you guys. Anyway, so back to focus, Ash. So I think today's subscribers are a vanity metric, and it makes sense, right? Like, let's say you, Rob, you subscribe to 20 channels and they each publish a video that day. You don't want to get 20 notifications.
Yeah.
Right? But early on, subscribers were important, and we were like stuck at like less than 10,000, just as a little bit of a motivation for anybody watching. We started off in 2006, 2007. We launched the official WatchMojo channel, but we had one called Froosh before. And yeah, it took forever because I think it didn't hit me yet that like, well, people want like a very like, what am I subscribing to? If you subscribe to Sports Illustrated, you were going to get sports. If you subscribe to Fortune, you would get business articles. And so it took a while, but really I would say, as we've covered in the previous shows, we found like our product market fit. And then we, after taking 6 years to hit 10,000 or 5 years, then the 6th year we went from 10,000 to 100,000. And that's when I was like, okay, we're clearly finding a connection with, you have viewers. You want to convert your viewers, sure, to subscribers, into an audience and a community, but that's really, you want them fans.
Yeah.
And like, if you look at it as a pyramid, there might be 1% that are hardcore fans. Then you might have 10, 20, 30% who are part of your community. And then you have a lot of people that are passersby. And given our editorial scope and range, we have a lot of people that are just watching a video and whatnot. But yeah, and then so finally in 2012 to 2013, we went from 100,000, we 10x to 1 million. And we had already launched the suggest tool, which early on was a great way for users on our site to give, idea topics, suggestions. But yeah, and I remember vividly, I was sitting on my couch. It was like 9-10 p.m. and I was like, refresh. In the background, I was watching the World Series. I think it was Game 7. Boston Red Sox were, there you go. There you go.
Iconic moment.
So literally, this happened. Like minutes later, we hit 1 million. And this stays with me. And people are like, you have a good memory. But I'm like, you remember these
things. It's a big moment. Yeah.
It's a big moment. And it was like Game 7 of, the World Series. And so long story short, we hit 1 million. And then from there, the next year we 5x. Sorry, as people are seeing.
You're popular this morning.
Occasionally. Anyway, so no, it was a great moment. And I felt like I was top of the world. But obviously this was, I think, October. And then we continued. But as you said, it wasn't just all upwards and to the right. There were definitely going to be some. And this was like at the time we would like try to not just do our top 10s to kind of develop a rapport with the community. This was WatchMojo lady Rebecca and Dan, who was another one of our kind of voiceover. I mean, we all did so many things. Dan was like Rebecca, a writer, a researcher, and we all wore many hats. And it was a great period. I mean, it was honest to God. I really, really felt like, the next year we would take over the world. But again, it was never upward trajectory. There was always like, 2 steps forward, 1 step back.
Right. And didn't you have a meeting with YouTube shortly after hitting 1 million where they were like, within the next year, you'll be going from 1 million to 8 million, and they were all enthusiastic about the trajectory that you were on? Why do you think that was?
Well, so what happened was us being based in Montreal. I don't even know if YouTube really had like a team at the time in Montreal. So whenever like certain exec and like the YouTube kind of power base was in San Bruno in near San Fran. So I would occasionally, when I would be in New York, meet them. So I was like, hey, if ever you have like senior execs in New York or Toronto, they may not want to trek to Montreal, but I was like, I'll gladly, it's an hour flight, right? So I was like, I'll gladly come down. So yeah, our channel manager at the time, this gal named Amy Singer, who was one of the goats, like WatchMojo's history, she'd be one of the 10 people who really played a part as an outsider, because there was always something, that I'd wake up to that we'd have to fix or remedy. But so she was like, this gentleman, Alex Carlos, is going to be in Toronto. Let's grab lunch. So we went, and it reminded me of that scene in Wolf of Wall Street early on when Leo DiCaprio is starting his career, and he's having, you're going to bring me a martini and one more, where Matthew McConaughey is like, you're going to bring me more martinis until I pass the fuck out type of thing. Great scene, by the way. And when Matthew McConaughey's character is like, oh, you'll do wonderful things and you'll make a ton of money. And Leo's just like, oh my God, like smitten. So I was like, oh, wow, 8 billion subs. And, it's after 5 years of like wandering in the desert, finding product market fit, which every time I thought was like light at the end of the tunnel was like an oncoming train. And again, here you go. So like end of October, hit 1 million. We keep growing and growing. Early December, I go to Toronto, meet them, have lunch. You're going to hit. He was like, where have you been? How many views? How many subscribers? He's like, I reckon next year at this point, you'll be at 8 million subscribers. I was like, oh, wow. And then 3 days later, I wake up and the channel is down. Which sucked.
And it was a big deal because you guys were, you had a lot of momentum at that time. Like, obviously this was like a news story that WatchMojo had gone down. So what happened exactly?
So to be honest with you, this was not even like, okay. So what happened basically was we had really good relationships with rights holders because, as I've mentioned, we would like interview Lady Gaga. We would interview Justin Bieber. We do, Q&As with the directors. And they were sending us electronic press kits. And even somewhere here, I have a beta tape as like a symbol. Like, I did not break into Warner Music's headquarters and steal this. They evidently sent it to us. It was always like a symbol. So I did have this insecurity that I was like, I don't want people to think we're like a rogue operation. Like, we're ethical. We are like a good corporate player. So rights holders were generally like starting to learn Content ID, which I always said was a weapon of mass destruction. So they set rules, right? Like, they could be like, if any of our IP is used, issue a copyright strike. Mm-hmm. But there are cases, and it's precedent in law, that like a rights holder has to consider, could this be fair use? They can't just use these tools like a weapon of mass destruction. But because rights holders, it's not like the VP of marketing is sitting there like doing this. They hire shops. A lot of them were like in the Philippines or lower cost environments where their mandate is just issue claims and strikes. So what happened was we did get a couple of strikes by a rights holder, and they were like, yeah, it's fine. We'll retract this strike because it's not a valid copyright infringement case.
Right.
So they were like, we'll retract it. But at the time, YouTube itself was navigating fair use and DMCA, Digital Millennium Copyright Act, and trying to establish Content ID rules. And we would kind of share cases and precedents, and we would, like, with permission of some rights holders, be like, look, these guys don't have an issue. You are interpreting the law, and you're allowed to, and implementing it in a way that makes sense for your business. But my argument, as we've covered on previous episodes, was if you're trying to be a neutral platform to be protected by the safeguards of the DMCA and the Telecommunications Act, well, then you can't now actually be judge and jury.
Yeah.
So, and they would, again, to their credit, it took time. It was a huge company. They were being sued by Viacom, but they were trying to do this, right? But it were always kind of like, I mean, I hope this term is not offensive, you know, like a Mexican standoff in movies where you're like, everybody's shooting at one another. We were just always caught in the crossfire. Mm-hmm. So even though the rights holder retracted the claims, YouTube had to literally process these retractions. So even though heading into like the Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa holiday season, we were like, okay, these claims have been retracted. A bit early to see some guy's butt, by the way.
He cut off just in time.
Just in time. So even though the strikes were retracted, YouTube did not process the retractions. So it was like after a certain number of days, we were like in the penalty box, and automatically our channel went down. And actually, in the 10-Year Overnight Success, that's the opening scene, you know, of the book, where I'm at the mall in Montreal with my daughter, who at the time was 5, and we're waiting in line to go see Santa Claus. And she's 5, and her face was so round, and she was so excited. And, you know, today I'd be like, fuck it, I'll deal with it when I get home. But at the time, it's like blitzkrieg, you know, it's like, to you, it's like Pearl Harbor. You're like, you got to react, you know. And so I was like, Roxy, my love, if you don't mind, could we do Santa Claus like next week? Daddy has to go home. Now, couldn't even find the car in the parking. My head was elsewhere. It was just like, it was like everything, you know, and I was like rushing home and didn't want to crash the car. And you want to be stoic, and you want to be like, again, I used to say Chris Rock, you know, it's like the cop stops you. It's like, get out of the car, get out of the car. And like, as a driver, you're like, maybe I did something wrong. Maybe I stole this car. And so I got home and I fired off again, like a diplomatic but very terse email to YouTube being like, you guys can't keep, on the one hand, asking content creators to embrace the platform and go all in, which at the time YouTube I knew was not a pariah, but was seen as a pariah. But I was like, get your fucking act together. I go, here are all the emails. The rights holders have retracted it. We sent it to you. And I was like, we're not going to go public like other creators and bash you. And the way they apologized. They're like, yeah, this was like a procedural thing. So to their credit, so that was like the weekend, like a Monday, we were waiting for the channel to come back up. And for me, it was embarrassing professionally, because it was like, you know, guilty before, you know, screw the innocent till proven guilty. It was like judge and jury. You got shot in the parking lot, you know? And then I remember one of my colleagues, Kevin, walking in to my office, and he's like, I think the site's back up. I'm like, the channel. I'm like, yeah, I think it is too. I was like, but let's not celebrate. But it was just, you know, it's like a harrowing experience. But when I look back, it's all good, and it's part of the journey. It allowed me actually to become a bit more like proactive with the team, to be like, look, I don't micromanage, but just because we think YouTube is going to do something or process this or that, I'm like, let's just double check. So I was like, look, if in the future, I'm like, are you sure? Did they retract the claim? Could you email them? Could you get a confirmation? I always then could point to the hack, and not the hack. I could point to the hack was another incident, but I could point to the channel going down to be like, hey, I'd rather not micromanage you, but let's not leave anything to chance. So we came back up, but it was like very symbolic of the, you know, not even two. I mean, yeah, it wasn't one step forward, one step back. It was like 2-3 steps forward, but there was always one step back. There was always like a nice shit burger waiting for you.
I imagine WatchMojo couldn't have been the only big channel to be affected in such ways. Was this incident kind of like a representation of what was going on across the platform at that time?
Yes. I mean, look, the reality was behind the scenes. So it was later on. There's different things, right? There's like platform risk. There's community guidelines. There's, best practices. There's misleading. Later on during COVID, there was all disinformation, and then copyright was one of the other things. So again, being an intellectually honest, self-aware individual, I was like, we use third-party IP, some of it licensed, some of it under marketing, like explicit permission, whatever, but a lot of it through fair use. So I wasn't like, oh my God, the injustice, poor. I was like, look, I understand. We're always like the diplomatic Canadians, between being born in Iran, growing up in Canada, I was very diplomatic with them, even though I probably gave some other employees like PTSD because, I was like, I had a business to run. I had to take care of my employees. If the channel's down, we're fucked. It's not very complicated. But yes, I think ultimately we were always a bit more understanding and empathetic, and I never wanted to like drive the Google YouTube employees crazy. But it was like everybody who was on YouTube had to navigate one thing or another. Sometimes it was just like community violation, which didn't make sense. But yeah, I mean, for us, I think the fundamental balance was behind the scenes. I was always helping other channels. Like even to this day, people email me out of nowhere and they're like, hey, I saw a video you did on Content ID or community violations. Could you help me? I know it's a long shot. And they're surprised when I go, okay, I think this is what you should do, or this is a response you should go with. Or I go like, could you just give me some details? And I think people are like, okay, like surprised, but I'd like to help there. It's the least I could do. But yeah, it was maybe, I won't lie, maybe I should have actually been a bit more forceful. Like I'll never forget when YouTube started to do like shindigs and invite channel partners. At the time, the CEO of Maker Studios, that was a multi-channel network, eventually acquired by Disney for like $700 million. So their CEO was, I apologize, I don't know if it's Enon or Einon Kreitz, but now he's the CEO of Mattel. And he just got up and he was like, you fuckers should get your act together. You know, and I was like, imagine somebody invites you to their house or their headquarters and you're like, the soup sucks ass. You know, I was like, you know, again, my upbringing, you know, again, I'm Canadian, I'm American trained as a business person. But to me, it was like, oh my God. But, you know, he was right. He was right to call them out. Whereas I was like, excuse me, could you get the stick out of my ass and this like lumbar out of my ear? Yeah, it's like, you know, we should have been like, why the fuck is our channel down? We didn't do anything wrong. But again, at that moment, you want to be diplomatic, you want to be gracious, but over time, you become more assertive. So yeah, everybody was dealing with one thing or another. And everybody felt like the world is against us. Whereas I was at the time like, look, guys, we use third-party IP. We have to navigate. And this is part of the racket. The analogy I used to use was I go, imagine you run a bar and you love it. You love the vibe, the music, the good-looking people, the drinks. But yeah, once every couple days or nights, some guy gets drunk or you either get sick in the toilet or there's a fight that breaks out. You don't like to see that, but it's part of running a bar, unfortunately. You know, it's part of it. So for us, it was kind of part of the racket. But yeah, definitely, like it was like the year 2 or 3 of what was like a very, very stressful 10-year period.
Did their execs realize like the urgency of this like right away? Like how did they respond to the calling out, so to speak, that they got from some of the channels affected?
Yeah, so you know, obviously there were so many executives. I've said this already. I always see the best in people. I always project people to be a lot more virtuous than they are, if I could be candid now. So I don't want to paint them all with one brush. You'd be surprised. They were actually always very nice and professional and diplomatic. I think YouTube, and this is kind of more of a commentary on like YouTube versus Google and all that. So Google was really like, yeah, the brainchild of Sergey Brin and Larry Page, a couple of Stanford grads. They built a search engine that was superior. And then they brought in like some really smart people like Omid Kordestani, a Paisano, many others. But they had like this kind of like golden goose, golden egg, whatever, like this kind of like just the best system ever that they kind of fell ass backwards in. And I mean, no disrespect. We've covered why Google became successful. They weren't the first. They got a lucky deal with Yahoo and just a lot happened for them to win. And I love Google. Like I own a ton of shares. I've always been super pro Google. I even defend them. But Google developed this sense of like the superiority complex where they would hire really smart people from a select number of schools only. And they all felt like, again, I could say this now, and maybe 15 years ago, I wouldn't say it because it sounds a bit mean, but they really felt like they fucking built Google. Like they felt like they played a constructive part in like the origins of Google when they didn't, to be honest. They just kind of got hired and it was just like a money printing machine and they kind of built this dominant business. Okay, so that's Google. The Google employees that ended up going to YouTube after Google bought YouTube were kind of the misfits. And this is like anecdotal and direct testimony and conversations I've had, but it's like decades old there. I don't think anybody cares. A lot of like the guys and gals who left Google to go to YouTube after it acquired YouTube were like the misfits, the risk takers, the weirdos, like the people who were like, yeah, this YouTube is like this weird new thing, but let's go work there, right? But because Google Video failed spectacularly, and then Google bought YouTube was always like kind of like a bit different culture-wise, right? The people that went to YouTube, I always felt, did not have the same chip on their shoulder as the Google people that felt they were like masters of the universe that built this money printing superior product. So to me, as like somebody that likes organizational behavior, psychology, people, and like get into it, I always felt that like the Google, again, I love Google and I love all their employees, but I felt the Google employees were like overconfident when they had really not built anything.
Right.
They improved it. They fucking improved everything. Conversely, I felt the YouTube employees were a bit like more demure and more like humble, like pound for pound. And they were always like, yeah, we experiment, we try, we've done things, but we don't always get it right. And I sense that they always actually came to us, especially in hindsight, to be like best practices. What do you do? But also because they realized I wasn't just like some creator who had zero understanding of business, management, the law, technology, finance, so I was always like, when they would try to explain it, I'd be like, yeah, that makes sense because of this, or that makes sense because of that. So they were always, even if behind closed doors, or like, Ash is crazy, he emailed us again, what is the status on this? Like, false modesty aside, it's their platform, it's their decision, but we helped shape ContentID policies in the end. Because at first they were so tilted to the rights holders, and it didn't make sense given the way the DMCA and all that works. But I actually felt they were always very gracious. They were very empathetic, because we were also diplomatic, right? We weren't like, we had to be a bit more assertive when need be, but I always felt that they were kind of, like cool and, understanding, but they also didn't care in the sense that it was a platform. So they were like, if I was like, oh, we're going to leave, they were like, okay, sayonara, don't let the door hit you on your ass, buddy.
Before we continue on that note, I just want to let the audience know that we have a poll that has gone up on our YouTube channel. We would like to know, how long have you been watching WatchMojo? From the very beginning, has it been less than 10 years, or are you a new subscriber? So head over to our YouTube page and weigh in on that, and we'll get to the results at the end of the show. Let's talk a little bit more about the reality of being on a platform that you don't own or have ultimate control about.
Yeah, so one of the main criticisms of WatchMojo, and one of the main criticisms I got, not personally, but like as a personal professional decision I made, was building on YouTube. VCs, journalists, executives, my fucking neighbor, my blind dog, everybody had an opinion on this. Nobody had any fucking clue, but everybody had an opinion on this. They were like, you're making a mistake. Why would you do this? Yada, yada. And for years I listened to them. But the reality is, look, WatchMojo is one of the greatest digital media success stories. Even if tomorrow, like fucking Kim Jong-il hits nuclear strike on our headquarters and we're forgotten, like our 20-year history will go down as one of the greatest like startup stories, yada, yada. Again, we're not owed anything tomorrow, but so that is just a fact, right? From on any metric, and I don't care. I'm not here to, this is free advice for those that want to be a storyteller entrepreneur. I'm not here. I don't need to fucking prove anything to anybody. But so the point I'm getting at is, people had to be realistic, that I was like, the world is moving towards these big platforms, these technology platforms. Yes, some fucking octogenarian Sumner Redstone on his deathbed was like, content is king, and we'll use that line because it works for us. But that's because you're lazy. You didn't actually read what the fuck the guy was saying. He was just saying new distribution opens up the avenues for new content. So content is king because he's a fucking content owner. But I was like, get your heads out of your ass. The world is moving to these distribution platforms. Mm-hmm. And so for us, though, like Animal Farm, all platforms are equal, but some are more equal than others. So I was also like, you moron who's sitting here and like reading something that Mark Zuckerberg did on Facebook, you're then making this giant leap to make a comment about YouTube. And I would explain to them that Google, because they became this $1 trillion business, because they shared revenue, They sent traffic away. It was actually, yeah, they could be evil. They could be greedy. You could be this socialist, communist loser in your basement with your jar of Vaseline and your bag of Cheetos complaining about the world. But I'm like, Google actually understood the power of an ecosystem. And yes, that was transferred. That ethos, that DNA was transferred to YouTube, where even if they view us all as pawns and they don't give 2/3 of zero fucks about like individual creators, they do realize that the ecosystem has to be healthy. So I was like, if you are lazy, like even with fair use, even the lawyers who are experts, the smart, the intellectually honest ones were like, Ash is a layman. He's not a lawyer. But unlike you, Lardo, he reads the cases, he reads the precedent. So his arguments are not copyright as this or that, you know? So if you actually were not intellectually lazy, you would understand that YouTube was just something different, which today, again, is the proof. Number one in fucking video, number one in fucking podcasts, number one in music, number one entertainment platform. But all these people had all these opinions, you know, and that's the thing. You know, there's a great saying, don't ask for the, like, don't care about the criticism of someone whose opinion you won't ask.
Right.
You know, like I go up to employees, zero experience, green, clueless, lost at sea, and because I value opinion. And our business, I can't just be like in 1995, I watched Seinfeld. I'm like, what are you watching? You know, like it's a different thing. And I think of the world differently. But I should have not listened to all these people because I wasn't going to kind of listen to them and go build a media company based on last year's playbook. So, you know, the reality was I would diplomatically tell them, okay, like we think this is the way to go. But yeah, nobody really wanted to build. And I think it's driven by greed also, where media companies don't want to share their revenue that could be generated from their IP with YouTube. But as I said, I love that YouTube has made millions of dollars from us. Trillions, in fact. No, I'm kidding. Because that means we've made a lot of money as well, right? So you have to have that mindset, and it is what it is. So I do feel a bit of like vindication. This is not anger. Maybe it's la pasión. But I mean, it is a bit like tiresome when you think about it, that like for 10 years, I was trying to kind of like convince people. But then in hindsight, I'm like, why did you need to convince anybody? Just let them drive off a cliff. You know?
Fair enough. Did you see any other platforms that had similar issues with Content ID, or maybe even continue to have issues with it?
Yeah, I mean, Facebook was like Facebook was just a shit show disaster, like from the beginning. Because Facebook's problem was that Mark Zuckerberg really did not give a fuck about content, storytelling, media, like zero. You know, and that's fine. He's a Silicon Valley guy, tech guy. He wants to, you know, not like Elon go to Mars, but the equivalent of, you know, go to Mars. So he always, I think, viewed video as like a means to an end, a necessary evil. And, you know, Facebook's employees were also, for the most part, like nice people. But you would need that one asshole as well, who was just like some bitter loser who was like a reject of Hollywood, but like hired by Facebook to navigate video. But you sensed his bitterness and his own insecurities. And like, I just could tell that like Facebook has a lot more internal issues, and they don't have their purpose. They don't have their raison d'etre. They don't know what the why is. Why are we in fucking video, right? So there was a lot of companies. I remember this one, Little Things, you know, and I'm not saying this to slag them, but they happened to build a business on Facebook. Algo change, disappeared, bye-bye. You know, I know a lot of fellow entrepreneurs who built the business on Facebook. And again, I was like amicably just saying like, I'm not sure Facebook is that stable. But I also understood the reality that they had caught lightning on Facebook. So it made sense for them. So Facebook to me was just, you know, not at all stable. It was like the crazy girlfriend who's not even attractive in a way. So it was like there was no reason to really lean in. And yeah, I mean, then you see TikTok and this and that. And you know, I think what I love about what's happening now is YouTube has really separated from the rest of the class. You really have to be a moron to really look at YouTube the way you would look at Meta, Insta, TikTok, Crapster, whatever. And I think to their credit, YouTube's doing a good job of articulating why. You know, CTV, connected TVs it's the main consumption platform on YouTube. So it's kind of more like traditional TV, whether you like to admit it or not. Mm-hmm. They're coming out and communicating that they're, you know, they've surpassed Spotify to become the number one podcasting platform. They are the number one music platform, whether you like it or not. You know, it's more people watch YouTube music than, you know, anything else. So I think, it's to me, the takeaway is when you have an idea as an entrepreneur or a storyteller, you're never going to get the so-called perfect conditions that you want. You really, really are going to be like, you have to compromise and you have to give and take. And that really does explain a big chunk of our success, basically.
I have a note here about a market analogy and watermelons, which I don't understand, but I need to ask you what this is.
I've alluded to this saying, imagine like, doesn't need to be watermelons, could be oranges, tomatoes. You could have like, the greatest apples, and you want people to come to your farm and pick apples at your farm. And that's a good experience and it's fun. But if you want to be in the apple business, you have to go to the markets. You have to go where the people are and when the consumers go. You can't just assume that you're better tasting apple, I guess, unless you're Eve, but like you can't just assume that your sweeter apple is going to draw in the interest of others. That's the point, right? So a lot of people throughout the 2010s were still in this mindset that I have the sweetest apples. People are going to come to my farm and eat the apples here. And I was like, it's just a fucking apple. Whether I eat your apple or that apple, it's convenience. And for me, I'm going to walk 2 blocks to a market where I could get my apples, where I could get my oranges and tomatoes. And that's what YouTube was becoming. It was just, even today before the show, we were just talking about what we consume and what we watch. YouTube, I also used to tell a lot of creators who are like, yeah, YouTube is this. You guys use clips. You guys are top 10s. I was like, shut up. That's what you do. I was like, there's more people that watch our fucking content than yours. I didn't say this to them then, but I was like, okay, thank you for your feedback, Lardo. But the point I'm getting at is, yes, I mean, YouTube has become 2 billion things to 2 billion different people. So it's not what I think is YouTube or what you think or what that is. You have to understand that we live in a world of niche. It's no longer 1960 where you could run an ad for Pepsi on ABC, NBC, or CBS and reach 80% of America.
Yeah.
It doesn't work like that. It's fragmented. You actually have to work. I love marketers. I'm a marketer at heart, in a way. I'm a storyteller. I like all these functions. But marketers are lazy sometimes, and to succeed and to cut through the clutter, you got to roll up your sleeves and work.
Right. But doesn't that yield better results also because things are so much more niche and targeted now?
Yeah, of course, because if you're like, okay, yes, but like I sometimes get pitches from entrepreneurs who are like, oh, we launched this like new media company targeting dads. And I'm a dad of 2 gals, so I'm interested, let's say, in that, or just this week, I got this gentleman was like, I think affluent blacks are underserved in the market. And I said, you're right. I go, anecdotally, I'm not black, but I do think you're right about that. But my question after a few exchanges was, do you need a dedicated media brand? Yes, as a viewer, as a user, if you're an affluent black, you might care about different topics, and that I don't doubt. But if you're a marketer and ultimately marketing underwrites this, do you need a dedicated like media brand for affluent blacks, or could you reach affluent black people through programmatic different places? They're around. They're on our channel. They're on Yahoo, right? So yes, it is better because the world is more fragmented and niche, but it's also harder, worse in a way because it's hard to support those media publications as well, because ultimately not that many people are going to pay for it as a subscription. And I don't know if the dollars are there the way that they used to be in magazines where you could go and buy some ads, print ads. It was just programmatic has changed the rules, right? So that's also a good point you made, which is you could have in 2025 a really smart editorial strategy, but that may not anymore translate to a good commercial strategy. And so you do really need to start with the macro. It's a balance. You have to balance your strengths, what you care about with what is happening in the world.
Interesting. So we have our poll results in. We asked, how long have you been watching WatchMojo? And about 33% of people said for around 10 years. 33% said a couple of years. 25% said from the beginning. So the OGs, and 8% said that they are new subscribers. So we have a lot of longtime viewers.
That's great. I mean, it's bittersweet. I don't want to lie. I'm a human. So I have, like yesterday, I checked out of the hotel and the lady was like, can I email you the invoice or receipt, the whatever? I was like, yeah, sure. She's like, what's your email? I gave her my email at WatchMojo.com. And she was like, thank you. And then she's like, by the way, I love the website. She used website. I'm assuming she meant channel, but maybe she's one of the few on our website. But she was like, I love the website. And I get that a lot now. And it's not like doesn't go to my head. I go, this is the generation that grew up on YouTube, so they know us. But okay, false modesty aside, we obviously have like 50 million subscribers. It's great. But I also have this part in me that wants to go like ballistic and break chairs when people say, and it's a good thing, but it's when they're like, oh, I remember years ago I used to watch WatchMojo.
Oh,
or
yeah.
it's like, oh, memories of my childhood. You know, and I get it. If somebody started watching us 15 years ago, okay, now they got kids, they got a mortgage. It's a bit different. So that's one of my personal kind of just things that I'm like, okay, let's draft on that. And you know, you always say you want, as a deal maker, your best deal to be tomorrow, not yesterday. You, as an athlete, you want to score your greatest goal, your biggest victories tomorrow. So even with WatchMojo, I'm like, I want to make sure that over the next 20 years, WatchMojo's best days are ahead of it, you know?
Right.
And also, that's why I hired and I'm working with people in a certain way now, because you need a team and you need people who believe in that. If you have people, this is anything, a business, a team, if you have people that aren't committed, like in hockey, there's a couple of players that got traded recently, and they went from playing with like Nathan, the Rantanen guy. He was playing with McKinnon, getting like 100 points. He's now in Carolina, and it's like, is he a fraud? But it's not that he's a fraud. He just doesn't have that same passion and that same fire. And you got to cut that guy. You got to just trade him for a bag of pucks, because he's not going to be contributing to the team's goals. You know, so yeah. I do think that part of it is, okay, we've been around for 15, 20 years, but how do we draft on that moving forward and not just rest on our laurels and have a big head because of something that happened 10 years ago?
Right. That's a great mindset. And on that note, let's say WatchMojo didn't exist and you were starting from scratch today. What would your approach be?
OnlyFans. I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Hey, there's a market for everything.
There is, but it's like not general. No. So look, it's like you got to be careful because, yeah, we talk about Hollywood being gatekeeper. Yeah, there's great people in Hollywood and there's toxic people, right? And same thing, there's some great people who work in tech and there's some like morons. Like, there's some very arrogant assholes, let's say. Ultimately, we've traded gatekeepers for these tech overlord platforms, right? Like we are at the mercy of Elon Musk, what he ate and how he feels this morning. You know, whereas like Google, YouTube is more professional. It's a bunch of executives. That's also something we didn't touch on. But so I still think the best game in town is YouTube. Yes, I tell people go look at Snap, go look at X. X, I think, is a very promising platform, but it ain't YouTube. It could be TikTok. It could be Facebook. You know, if Elon wakes up tomorrow and goes, oh, people are using videos to trash me and to ridicule Tesla, he's going to fucking disable video. You know what? I'm not saying he would, but that's the kind of guy he is. He's a brilliant genius, but he's also very insecure. And I've said it, everybody is driven by insecurities. So I still think at a high level, YouTube is the place to be. But I think a lot of people are lazy or don't open their blinds, where I'm like, don't look in the rear view. Like if you want to come in and are like, I want to do a top 10 channel featuring clips on entertainment, I'm like, bro, look forward. You know, and we talked about whether it's space, science, cloning, AI, blockchain, something. What are the things that the fandoms, the communities that are going to emerge? Then find the platform format fit. You know, do you do explainers? Do you do whatever? So I definitely think YouTube is the best game in town. But I strongly urge people, look at X, look at even TikTok. Like you have to go where the puck is going, you know, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, Ash, I think that pretty much does it. This was a great, very interesting story. Let's preview next week's episode where we talk about how WatchMojo decided to go big or go home.
Yeah, so I mean, the next year in 2014, we're actually the 7th largest channel in the world on YouTube, which is not bad. I'll take it. But that was also in some ways when then the deluge started, right? So we faced increased competition and clutter. We then kind of went from, I say, the Montreal Expos to wanting to be the New York Yankees. So we recruited execs and we launched like a gazillion, you know, products and projects, and we tripled headcount. At one point, we're 75. And as I said, great, but very chaotic time. So we'll talk about that. You know, basically, everything is relative, but like you get to the top, so to speak. How do you stay on top? Definitely not obvious or easy. And I think net successfully executed on that, but we made a shit ton of mistakes. And I look forward to talking about those next week.
Should be an interesting one.
Cool.
All right. Well, thank you as always. It was a pleasure, and I'll see everybody next week.
Take care, guys.
Bye.
Cheers.